Hey there, and welcome to the Motion Science video podcast. My name is Cameron, and today we're going to talk about something I get asked all the time. People constantly ask me, how do you come up with ideas or how do you figure out what you're going to create? There are so many possibilities. And the simple answer is creative constraints. Hey there, and welcome to the Motion Science Video Podcast. My name is Cameron. You know that. And as I mentioned right before the titles there, today we're talking about something very important, which is creative constraints. Because, like I said, I get asked all the time, like, how do I come up with ideas? How do I figure out what it is I'm going to create for a project? Because there's so many possibilities when it comes to motion graphics. And that is true. That is very true. There's a lot of possibilities. I feel like a lot of times with motion graphics that it's endless, right? There's every day, every week I'm seeing new techniques coming out or people pushing a technique a little bit farther and and it just opens up my mind to a lot of like, potential ideas for projects. And that's exactly the point of this is that I'm seeing a technique that I recognize the base of it and I'm saying, wow, look how they pushed it in a different direction or they pushed a little bit farther than what I've seen in the past. And that's a perfect example of creative constraints. It's saying, okay, if I limit myself to approaching a project this way, how can I make it even better? And that's how we get better work, better projects, better motion design. Okay. Essentially, if you think about having unlimited creativity, that ultimately creates unlimited problems, right? Because if we have just an open platform, an open source, an open amount of possibilities for where we can go with a project, that's going to just create a lot of problems because there's no direct path, there's no constraints saying, okay, you have to work within this realm of creativity to come up with a solution. So if a client when the thing about like when a client comes to you, okay? When a client comes to you, they typically are going to come to you with limited creative. They're not going to have an unlimited color palette. They're not going to have unlimited logos, unlimited typefaces, unlimited imagery to work with, uh, because they have like a brand guide typically, or they have an idea of where they want to go. Now, if they don't have that and they're like it's an open canvas, that's a client you probably don't want. Okay, but that's another topic because that's not an ideal client. That's a client who doesn't know what they want, and they're going to keep coming back to you over and over and over again, and it's going to create a lot of headache for you. So you don't want that client. So, but a good client is going to come to you and say, "Okay, number one, here's our let's say we're doing a logo animation. Here's our logo. These are the three colors that are in our brand. These are the three colors you have to work with. This is the one or two typefaces that you have to work with." Right? And so you're already creatively constrained to those 5 or 6 assets to work with. If you're working with, like, let's say a title sequence, the title sequence is based on a movie that's, let's say it's an action movie. So you're already not gonna, like, approach the title sequence from a romantic point of view. It's an action movie, and it's let's say it's a dark action movie, which of course, I love dark. So that's going to say we need to work with dark textures and dark colors, or I mean, it can go on and on and on. A typical client is going to come to you with a limited creative palette, and that's how you need to approach your own personal work. Okay. If you want to create art and you want to actually finish that art, then you need to have constraints. Okay. Simplicity plus the lack of options unleashes the power of creativity. Let me say that again. Simplicity plus the lack of options unleashes the power of creativity. This is an amazing exercise for any artist, any motion designer. My best work comes from creative constraints, creative limitations. If I just finished recording a lesson for ProFlows Plus. If you haven't heard of ProFlows Plus, it's a membership that I have through Motion Science. It's where it's at. It's where every month I release new content to you, new trainings on techniques and workflows. And I just actually finished recording this morning a lesson on something that I don't want to go into details about it, but it was a lesson that I really struggled with. I had a topic, and the topic, if you think of a theme, right? Like let's say the theme is the color red, or well, let's just say the color red, right? The theme is red. Red is that's a lot. That could be the color red. It could be a red wagon. It could be the color of death is red. It could be love, right? Love is red. It could be, I think of like for me personally, I think of like the USSR, right? Um, Propaganda, things like that. That could, I mean, the red is it's too broad, right? So I had this theme for this set of lessons I was creating, and I had to take that theme, and I told myself, all right, you've got three shapes to work with for this theme, and I want you to take those three shapes, and this is me telling myself, and create a really powerful lesson because sometimes I'm really hard on myself when I want to create lessons to teach you guys because I want you guys, I'm all about value, right? And I want to give you as much value as possible for what you're paying for. And I want to take your knowledge of motion design and push it to that next level. And so when I do that, I want to create these amazing lessons for you. And if I limit myself to three objects, which is what I did, and I say I have to make something super rad, super dope to show you how you can take three objects and push it to something that looks really dope. That's what pushes me creatively, and I'm proud to say that I did it. And I feel really awesome about it. But before I limited myself to these three objects, I had that theme, and I've racked my brain on it for days. I like to typically take, like when I'm teaching lessons in motion science, I like to take several days and think about what I want to create around a theme. And I had done that with this theme, but I found I was testing. I do a lot of testing, and I built this project, and I built another project, and I built a third project. I think I built four projects, and as tests, and I'm like, man, these all suck, man. They're not just, like again, I'm hard on myself. Maybe you guys would have enjoyed what they were, and maybe look about another time, but they weren't there, and so I forced these creative constraints on myself, and I said, okay, here's these three shapes, create a lesson, and I did it, and I'm proud of what I created. It just gave me chills saying that, right? I find that for client work, it's the same process. My clients come to me and they give me brand guides and they give me assets to work with. And they're like, here's the generalized idea. Now create something. Having a client brief is ideal because a client brief, it limits you, right? It limits you on what you can do. Have you guys checked out Idea to Execution, the series I have? It's here on YouTube. It's also you can find it in different places. Look on YouTube or Instagram. But in it, I show you how to take a creative brief. I also teach this in Stylecraft, how you take a creative brief and you break it down. Those are limitations in that creative brief. And that is what you have to work with. And when you have a set amount of assets to work with, that's when you say, okay, well, I have these things. Now, what can I do with them? What can I create that's amazing? Because I don't want to put out anything as a motion designer that I'm not proud of. Um, I'm not going to put out, there is work I've done for clients that isn't most exciting work. There's corporate work I've done over the years. It pays some of the bills. Yes, we all do it. I guarantee you, those motion designers that you see out there in the world that are creating the most amazing work, they all do work behind the scenes that you never see because they pay the bills, right? Now, that's going on another subtopic, but just having those constraints allows me to put out work that I'm very, very proud of. And I find that typically those constraints will push me in ways I never thought possible. If you look at science, like what scientists do, they scientists all the time have these limitations. Like, here's where we're at, and we need to get to here. And how can we accomplish that? Engineers do that. Inventors do that. How can we solve this problem when we only have this to work with? And that's the same as create. That's creative constraints, right? So, what I would advise you to do is you need to limit your assets. If you're starting from scratch, and I'm a big proponent of doing spec work, because spec work creatively fulfills you. You put that spec work out to the world, and it attracts the clients that you're looking for. And it's this cycle, right? So whenever you're setting out to create something and you're like, where do I begin? Well, you limit your assets. You limit what you have to work with. So maybe you set forth and you say, I'm going to create um a piece. I'm going to use this typeface. I'm going to use this image. I'm going to use this color palette. I'm going to limit myself to 5 seconds, if I can get that out there. 5 seconds. And I'm going to use this music track. That's a lot of times how I like to work. I like to base a lot of stuff off of audio. And there I've limited myself to 4 or 5 assets, and I can begin. I can start getting creative. I listen to that music, and that music, inspires me to go a direction. I know I have these 4 assets to work with, this typeface to work with. What can I do interesting with this typeface? It's fun when you have an ugly typeface, a typeface that doesn't necessarily resonate with you. It's fun to see where you can push that creatively. You also need to limit your plugins. Okay. I preach this all the time. Now, there's a time and place for plugins, right? And I talk about it in other videos, but you need to limit your plugins from the get go unless you're doing something very specific to a plugin. If you're using a plugin for like physical physics, there's like plugins like Newton that can do physics, or if you're using particle systems inside of After Effects, there's particle system plugins. That's a specific type of job. Otherwise, limit your use of plugins to the very end. That's the polish. That's what I always like to keep at the very end. So limit your use of plugins, limit your use of effects in general, which typically is plugins and scripts, but limit your use of effects, right? And you also want to limit your time. That's a big, big one, right? Limit your time. There's a lot of artists that I see that they create something and they come back to it, and they come back to it again and again and again. And at the end, it's a kind of a turd, right? It doesn't look that great. So if you could limit your time to a project, it's a great creative constraint to really help you create something awesome. Like, dailies. There are a lot of artists out there are doing dailies. I mean, that limits you, right? You may have 2 or 3 hours to create something every single day. That's a creative constraint because you say, I've got this amount of time. I better knock something out, right? Now, if you're working on a project for a client or an assignment and you've got a little bit more time, a technique I like to use is I will build out that project, right? So let's say I'm building a project for 1 day, 2, 3 days. I build that project out. Then if I have the time, I allow myself to step away from that project, give myself a full 24 hours, 48 hours is even better. And then come back with fresh eyes on that project and have a real good look at that project, because a lot of times we get stuck in seeing this repetition over and over as we preview. Like, I don't know how you are, but when I preview my work, it's looping over and over, and it doesn't stop. And I'm making adjustments as it's looping. And our eyes can just get stuck in on that image and think it looks amazing. And if we step away for 24, 48 hours and come back, we can be like, actually, that's not as amazing as I thought it was. I can see with fresh eyes now. Let me make an adjustment here. So limit your time on a project. These things of limiting assets, limiting effects and plugins, limiting your time. These are just ways to help you work smarter and to help you create better motion design by setting creative constraints and limits for your projects. So that's what I got for you today. Hope you guys learned something new. As always, I invite you to check out motionscience.tv for awesome tutorials, training lessons, all good things. Until next time, I'm Cameron, and this is Motion Science. See ya.